I used to think winter silence was peaceful. I used to think I liked the way snow swallowed the world, leaving only the crackle of the fireplace and the hiss of the wind across our fields. I learned differently the first week of last December. My wife, Emily, had taken our twins to visit her sister in Minnesota. They planned the trip months earlier, and I would have gone with them if bronchitis hadn't flattened me like a truck. I insisted they go anyway. I didn't want my kids' winter break ruined by my miserable coughing. So I stayed behind in our century-old farmhouse, drafty, stubborn, and full of noises I usually ignored. When the interstate closed because of a massive storm front, I found myself more isolated than I expected. The nearest neighbor was nearly a mile away. Cell service flickered in and out. I spent my days drifting between restless naps upstairs and sitting by the fireplace downstairs, wrapped in a blanket and clutching my inhaler like a lifeline. Around the third night, the sleet began hitting the windows so hard it sounded like gravel. Fever blurred the edges of everything. When I went to the window to check on the storm, I noticed something that snapped through the haze. Boot prints along the tree line behind the barn. Fresh ones, deep ones. I told myself a hunter must have passed through, maybe someone tracking a deer. But the longer I stared, the less I believed my own excuses. The tracks didn't wander. They circled. They watched. That was the first moment I felt the wrong kind of cold. Not the winter kind. The kind that crawls under your skin and sits there. And it was only the beginning. By the next afternoon, my fever had climbed high enough that walking from the couch to the kitchen felt like crossing a desert. Still, the odd details kept pulling my attention away from my misery. The wooden gate behind the garden, normally latched, hung open, not swinging in the wind. Open. Our old barn, which had a motion sensor light installed by a previous owner, flickered every few minutes even though no animals lived there anymore. When I stepped out onto the porch to squint through the blowing snow, the light snapped on, stayed bright for 10 seconds, then cut off again. It did that 3 times. I told myself the storm was causing it to malfunction, but deep down I didn't buy it. That night I called Emily just to hear her voice. I didn't mention anything strange, didn't want her worrying from 2 states away. "You sound awful," she said. "Feel awful," I replied. "Promise you're resting?" "Trying my best." After we hung up, I sat by the front window and watched the barn lights stutter. Around midnight, through the white blur of falling snow, I saw something that hit me harder than any fever ever could. Someone, definitely a person, standing near the corner of the barn. Not moving, not calling out, just watching the house. I blinked hard, thinking exhaustion was playing tricks on me. When I opened my eyes again, the figure wasn't alone. Another stood beside it, taller, with a hood pulled low. The 2 of them turned their heads in unison toward the house, as if they'd both sensed me staring back. I ducked away from the window so fast I made myself dizzy. For the first time, I wondered if I wasn't alone out there. And for the first time, I felt real fear. The next morning, the fever hit like a hammer. I woke coughing so hard I felt like I might tear something inside my chest. The house smelled like old wood and stale air. A sure sign I should have opened a window, but the storm outside had only grown worse. By midday, it was impossible to pretend anymore. The men I'd seen weren't passing hunters. They weren't lost travelers. They were still there. I spotted them again through the living room window. 3 figures this time, half hidden among the trees, spaced out like they were taking positions. They moved slowly, with purpose, studying the house, studying me. I grabbed the phone and called the sheriff's office. "We'll send someone," the dispatcher told me, "but the secondary roads are ice sheets. It's going to take a while." "How long is a while?" I asked. "Could be an hour, maybe more." My throat tightened. "I don't have an hour." "Stay inside," she said. "Keep your doors locked." I locked every door twice, but our farmhouse was old. Locks meant more in theory than in practice. Every gust rattled the mudroom door like someone testing it. As dusk fell, coughing fits racked my body every few minutes. I felt useless, slow, weak, lightheaded, not exactly the heroic type. When the sun had fully disappeared, I heard it. Not wind, not sleet. Voices, muffled, calm, close. I pressed my ear to the floor vent by the stairs and listened. He's sick, barely moving. Easy target. Lights haven't changed all week. Each sentence felt like an icicle sliding down my spine. They had been watching me, watching every cough, every flicker of the fireplace, every time I dragged myself past a window, and they thought I was too weak to do anything about it. The intruders waited until full dark before making their move. I heard the first strike against the mudroom door, low, deliberate, a pry bar wedged beneath the lock plate. The second hit split the wood. I didn't have time to think. I stumbled toward the stairs and pulled open the narrow door that led to the crawl space beneath them. A relic of old farmhouse design, cramped, cold, and lined with dusty piping. I dropped to my hands and knees and dragged myself inside just as the mudroom door gave way. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and final. I pressed myself between the joists, fighting the urge to cough. The floorboards above me groaned under heavy footsteps. There were at least 3 men, maybe 4. Their boots thudded across the kitchen and into the hallway. "Guy's gotta be upstairs," one said. "He barely walks." Another replied, "Hope he's out cold. Makes it cleaner." I clenched my inhaler so tight my hand ached. My lungs burned for a breath I didn't dare take. They opened doors, checked closets. Their movements were methodical, calm, too calm. They'd done this before. One of them stopped near the vent above my head. "He coughing earlier?" "Yeah," another answered. "Sounded bad." A plan formed in my fever-riddled brain. Stupid, desperate, but maybe my only chance. I forced myself to inhale through my nose and then released the loudest, wettest, most guttural coughing fit of my life. It tore through my throat like barbed wire. The reaction above me was instant. What the hell was that? Jesus, he's contagious. He sounds half dead. You want to catch whatever he's got? Their boots backed away from the vent. One muttered, "Forget it, we need another house. This place ain't worth it." Then, like a miracle, I heard the front door open, cold air rushing in as they fled into the storm. And then I passed out. I woke up to voices, real ones this time, firm, professional, familiar. "Marcus, can you hear me?" A flashlight beam cut through the crawl space opening. A deputy crouched down, his breath visible in the cold air. Behind him, red and blue lights washed across the walls. They carried me out and eased me onto the couch while a paramedic checked my pulse and lungs. "You're lucky you called when you did," the deputy said. "Storm cleared enough for us to get here." I was barely able to speak, but I managed. They were here. "We know. We found fresh tracks all around the house. Same boot prints linked to a group hitting rural homes off the interstate this week. They thought everybody was gone for the holidays." I closed my eyes, the coughing tearing through me again. "You scared them off," he added. "Whatever you did, it worked." I almost laughed, but it turned into more coughing. Guess being sick finally helped me. Over the next few days, as the fever eased and Emily drove back early, investigators filled me in. The men had been scouting empty rural homes, ones with cars gone, no footprints, no movement. They assumed our house was empty because they never saw me leave, and my lights stayed the same. They only realized someone was inside when they spotted me coughing through the window on the second night. They thought I'd be weak, helpless. They were right about the weakness, but not about the helpless part. Sometimes survival doesn't look heroic. Sometimes it looks like lying in the dark, lungs on fire, using the only thing you have left. In my case, it was bronchitis and dumb luck. Strength doesn't always come from power, skill, or preparation. Sometimes it comes from instinct, awareness, and refusing to give up even when you feel weakest. Trust your instincts, respect your limits, and never underestimate the value of small choices, because sometimes survival hangs on nothing more than paying attention and acting when it matters most. I never planned on working overnight shifts at a gas station. I was 23, juggling community college classes and trying to save enough money to buy Christmas gifts that didn't come from the clearance bin. That's how I ended up taking a temporary holiday job at the small 24-hour station on Route 18. The kind of place truckers stopped for coffee and locals refilled propane tanks during the winter. The station sat alone on a stretch of highway surrounded by frozen cornfields. At night, the nearest porch light was several miles away. The owner, Mr. Calhoun, told me on my first day, "Nights are slow, son. Easy money. Just keep the place clean. Don't fall asleep. And if anything weird happens, hit the alarm." I laughed at that. Weird things didn't happen in my town. Not the serious kind, anyway. Just bored teenagers or the occasional drunk driver looking for jerky. By December 20th, winter had dropped its hammer. Temperatures sank into the single digits, and the wind felt like it could cut through denim and bone. I wrapped myself in a thick hoodie and sat behind the counter watching the security monitors flicker, sipping instant coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. Around 2 a.m., the quiet felt heavier than usual, like the whole world was holding its breath. I remember looking at the frost building along the windows and thinking the station felt like a lonely island frozen in time. Then the door chimed. 2 men walked in, bundled in heavy coats with scarves pulled up to their eyes. They didn't grab coffee or snacks, didn't speak, just drifted down the aisles, turning their heads every few seconds to stare at me through the mirrors. That's when the quiet stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling wrong. I tried to convince myself they were just cold travelers. Maybe their heater broke. Maybe they were shy. Anything, really. Anything except the sinking feeling in my stomach. The men moved slow, their boots scraping across the tile. One pretended to study a map rack, but he wasn't reading anything. His eyes stayed fixed on me in the reflection of the convex mirror. Another tugged at his gloves, while whispering to the first guy, his breath fogging the scarf wrapped around his mouth. I kept my voice steady. "Evening, guys. Let me know if you need help finding anything." Neither answered. The air felt tight. My fingers hovered near the counter where the silent alarm button sat hidden beneath a flap of tape. Mr. Calhoun always said, "If your gut screams, don't wait. Hit it." My gut wasn't screaming yet, but it was whispering loudly. At 2:07 a.m., everything clicked into place. A third man tapped on the glass door from outside, not knocking to come in, tapping like someone delivering a signal. He jerked his head toward the parking lot, and the two inside subtly repositioned themselves, one edging closer to the register, the other stepping between me and the hallway leading to the office. My breath caught. They weren't customers. They were lining up a robbery. I moved toward the office, trying to look casual, but the man closest to me crouched down, pretending to fix his bootlace. "Careful back there," he said without looking up. "Wouldn't want you slipping." His tone made my skin crawl. Behind me, the other whispered, "Night clerk works alone. Sheriff won't get out here quick. Roads are iced over." I wasn't supposed to hear that, but I did. And suddenly, my quiet little overnight shift felt like a trap I'd walked into willingly. My hands were shaking, but my brain went into survival mode. I tried to remember the emergency protocol taped under the counter, the one Mr. Calhoun insisted I memorize even though I doubted I'd ever need it. If threatened, create the illusion of backup. That line jumped into my mind like someone had highlighted it in neon. I glanced at the intercom button on the register. It connected to the storage room in the back, a room that was definitely empty at this hour. But beneath the counter was a laminated card that explained how to activate a pre-recorded safety drill voice, an automated message the company used during training sessions. Nobody ever used it in a real emergency. Until now. I grabbed the intercom button and spoke loudly, forcing my voice to steady. "Hey, Sam, I'm closing out this shift early. You almost done with inventory back there?" The two men froze. Their eyes snapped toward the hallway. I pressed the smaller button beneath the counter, the one that triggered the pre-recorded reply. A calm male voice boomed through the speaker. "Inventory check complete. Coming up front now." The effect was instant. The man near the register stepped back. "There's another guy here?" The one crouched near me muttered. "Was supposed to be one. He said it was one." Through the window, the third man pounded on the glass, gesturing frantically for them to hurry. For a few long seconds, we all stood there, me clutching the intercom, them calculating, watching, tense. I prayed they wouldn't figure out the voice was fake. Then they panicked. "Let's go," one snapped. "Bad setup. Let's get out." They rushed out the door, slipping on the icy pavement as they scrambled to the truck idling under the streetlight. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the dark highway. I leaned over the counter, heart slamming against my ribs, and finally hit the real silent alarm. The station was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. The next 15 minutes felt longer than any hour of my life. The cold seeped through the glass, and the wind rattled the thin metal siding of the building. Every sound made me flinch. I kept replaying the men's voices in my head, the way they'd said, "Night clerk works alone," like they'd been scouting stations up and down the interstate. I double-checked the doors 3 times, even though the locks were already engaged. I turned off the lights in the aisles so I wouldn't be visible in the windows. My hands still shook so badly that I dropped my coffee mug, the ceramic shattering on the floor. I kept expecting the truck to come back. At 2:26 a.m., headlights swept across the parking lot. For a moment, panic returned, until I saw the sheriff's decal. 2 deputies stepped inside, snow dusting their hats. "You Javier?" one asked. "Yeah," I said, voice cracking. "Dispatch said you had 3 suspicious subjects here." I nodded and recapped everything, every whisper, every glance, every signal. They listened carefully, exchanging grim looks. "We've been tracking a group hitting rural stations along the interstate the last 2 nights," the older deputy said. "They come in bundled up, wait until the clerk is isolated, then move fast." "You scared them off," the younger deputy added. "Good thinking with that intercom." I shrugged weakly. Just remembered protocol. I didn't tell them I was a second away from passing out. The deputies swept the lot, checked the cameras, and stayed with me until the roads cleared enough for a patrol car to linger nearby. Just having them there made the night feel survivable again. But when the door finally shut behind them and their lights faded, the silence felt different, heavier, sharper, like danger had brushed past me and left a shadow behind. I'd never forget that feeling. For the remaining days of December, I worked only daylight shifts. Mr. Calhoun insisted. "Kid, you got guts," he told me. "But I'm not letting you take another overnight until we fix our security." The station installed a brighter parking lot light, new cameras, and stronger locks. Still, every time the door chimed, I felt my stomach tighten. The harmless customers, truckers buying energy drinks, couples grabbing snacks, teenagers on winter break, they all looked different to me now. Sometimes, late at night when I tried to sleep, I replayed the men's voices. "Night clerk works alone. Sheriff won't get here quick. Bad setup. Let's go." Their words had been casual, almost bored, like they'd done this before and would do it again. I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't remembered that protocol card, if the pre-recorded voice hadn't sounded real enough, if any one of them had pushed a little harder. A lot of ifs. Too many. On Christmas Eve, as I wrapped gifts for my little brothers, I found myself feeling grateful. Grateful for a job I didn't really want, for a boss who took safety seriously, and for a cheap intercom system that had saved me from becoming a headline. Mostly, I was grateful for instinct, and the fact that fear didn't freeze me. Fear made me act. I didn't stay at the station long. By January, a better job opened up at a local warehouse. But every year when December comes around, and the nights get quiet and cold again, I think back to that shift, the moment I realized how thin the line between ordinary and dangerous can be. And how sometimes, survival comes down to one quick decision in the middle of a frozen night. Courage isn't always loud or heroic. It often comes from acting calmly when fear tells you to freeze. Trust your instincts, follow your training, and never underestimate small preparations. In moments of danger, even a simple plan can be the difference between becoming a victim and walking away alive. I've always loved December. The lights, the cold, the brief sense that the world pauses long enough for people to enjoy each other's company. My company's winter gala was the one event every year that felt truly magical. They hosted it in a renovated historic theater downtown, the kind of place with velvet curtains, gold trim, and chandeliers that sparkled like frozen fireworks. I was excited for it, maybe too excited, because I stayed far later than I planned. I lingered over conversations with coworkers I barely saw outside of quarterly meetings. We swapped stories, laughed over champagne, and admired the jazz quartet that played standards from the balcony. When I finally checked my phone, it was nearly midnight. I promised myself I'd leave. Just 5 more minutes, I told myself. Those minutes stretched into 20. By the time I stepped outside, freezing rain had started falling in thin, icy needles. The marquee lights glowed against the wet pavement, reflecting in long streaks of gold and red. Rideshares were delayed because of the weather, and I didn't feel like waiting in the cluster of people huddled near the entrance. I'd walked to the bus stop 2 blocks away during summer events before. It seemed simple. Cut behind the theater through a narrow service passage and shave off a few minutes. I didn't think twice. I didn't even glance around before pulling my coat tight and heading toward it. What I didn't see, or even imagine, was the van parked across the street, dark windows facing the crowd, and the 2 men inside, watching for someone exactly like me. The passage behind the theater always felt harmless in daylight, just a narrow shortcut lined with brick walls and delivery doors covered in old posters. At night in December, it felt different. The only light came from a dying bulb flickering near the middle, and the sound of freezing rain hitting the dumpsters echoed like static. Still, I kept going. I just wanted to get to the bus stop and go home to my warm apartment, kick off my heels, and fall asleep under a blanket. About halfway through, I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, steady, too close. At first, I told myself it was just someone else leaving the gala, maybe a server finishing their shift, maybe another guest heading home. I didn't look back until the footsteps quickened. That's when a hand clamped around my arms and yanked me backward. "Don't scream," a man hissed in my ear. Another stepped in front of me, face half hidden by a hood. Phone, bag, jewelry, now. My stomach dropped. Everything inside me froze except my heartbeat, which pounded so loudly I felt it in my teeth. They were efficient, too efficient. One ripped my purse off my shoulder, the other dug through my coat pockets like they'd done this before. Then one of them said something that made my blood run colder than the sleet around us. The last one fought less. The last one. My breath caught. They had already hurt someone tonight. When the man in front reached for the pendant necklace my mother gave me, something I never took off, I felt something inside me snap. Instinct. Pure instinct. I didn't think. My body moved before my brain did. I drove the heel of my shoe straight into his shin, hard enough to make him grunt and stumble backward. The man behind me loosened his grip for just a second, and that 1 second was everything. I twisted out of his hold, the movement scraping my palms against the gritty brick wall. The cold air felt like ice cutting across my lungs as I sucked in breath to scream. "Help!" I yelled, my voice cracking. My scream echoed in the passageway, bouncing off the walls and carrying out toward the street. The men jerked like startled animals. "What are you doing?" The first one snapped at the other. "Get her!" But then something unexpected happened. Lights flipped on in a row of apartments above the businesses on the opposite side of the alley. Windows opened. Someone shouted, "Hey, what's going on down there?" The men panicked. Their confidence evaporated in seconds. "Forget it. Go!" one yelled. They sprinted toward the mouth of the passage, slipping on the icy pavement as they ran. I heard a van door slam, then the screech of tires on wet asphalt. And then it was quiet again. My hands throbbed where they'd scraped the wall. My necklace lay twisted against my skin. The freezing rain numbed my face, but the shock burned through every nerve. I stumbled to the street, drenched, shaking so hard I could barely stand, and waved frantically at the first pair of headlights I saw. A taxi pulled over, the driver's eyes widening when he saw me. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "No," I whispered. "Please, just drive." The days that followed blurred together. Police reports, photo lineups, and repeating the same story to different officers who took notes with serious, tired eyes. They told me there had been 2 other attacks that night, both near holiday events downtown. Someone had fought back. Someone hadn't. I kept replaying the moment one attacker said, "The last one fought less." I wondered who that person was, whether they were okay, whether they'd been walking alone just like I had. My friends tried to comfort me. "You survived. That's what matters," they said. My mom held me like I was a kid again. My coworkers brought food, blankets, and soft words I wasn't ready to hear. But nighttime was the worst. Sleep came in short, broken pieces. I avoided dark hallways, avoided shortcuts, avoided anything remotely resembling a narrow passage. Even the sound of freezing rain made my shoulders tense. One afternoon, Detective Malone called. "We found the van," he said. "We're working on identifying the men. You did the right thing. You probably saved yourself." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel heroic. I just felt lucky. And luck is a fragile thing to depend on. But slowly, day by day, I forced myself back into routine. Work, coffee runs, dinner with friends, normal life in small pieces. Still, every time I walked past the theater, where the lights sparkled and people laughed exiting the gala, I felt the echo of that night tug at me. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in familiar places. A week later, I took a walk downtown during the evening rush. Lights hung across the streets, carolers sang near storefronts, and people hurried past with shopping bags and rosy cheeks. It was beautiful, peaceful in a way I couldn't enjoy the year before. I paused near the theater's marquee. Cars idled in a line as people waited for friends. I watched the glow reflect off the wet pavement and felt the weight of that night settle into something I could finally hold without shaking. I realized I had spent so long believing danger looked a certain way, loud, obvious, dramatic. But the truth is, it can be quiet. It can be hidden. It can slip out from behind a familiar corner when you least expect it. My therapist told me, being cautious doesn't mean living in fear. It means valuing yourself enough to protect your safety. I think she was right. So now, I walk with more awareness. I ask for rides. I stick to well-lit streets. And I never again assume a shortcut is harmless just because it feels familiar. I still wear the necklace my mother gave me. The chain is slightly bent from where one attacker yanked it, but I keep it that way. It reminds me that I fought back, not because I was fearless, but because I wanted to go home. And wanting to go home can be the strongest instinct of all. As I headed toward my bus that evening, I didn't take the passageway. I walked the long way, under bright lights, surrounded by people, fully aware of every step. And this time, I wasn't ashamed of my caution. I was grateful for it. Trust your instincts, even when they feel inconvenient. Safety isn't paranoia, it's awareness. A familiar path can become dangerous without warning, but quick thinking, courage, and preparedness can turn fear into survival. Protect yourself, stay alert, and never assume that danger only happens to someone else. I always thought December had a way of showing you who you really were. The cold strips away the noise. No crowds, no traffic, no distractions. Just the sound of your own breathing. Before the divorce, I used to look forward to winter. My ex-husband, Mark, loved Christmas. He'd string lights around the house before Thanksgiving and blast the same old playlist while we argued over ornaments. I pretended that was warmth, that marriage meant holding on even when everything felt frozen. But the truth hit hard this past spring. Some things die long before the season does. So when December rolled around and my mother suggested I spend a few days at our family cabin in Red Hollow, I said yes. I told her I needed space, quiet, a place where my thoughts wouldn't echo off someone else's expectations. The cabin sat at the far end of a narrow mountain road, tucked behind a line of pines that always looked like they were standing guard. It wasn't fancy. Stone fireplace, old wooden beams, mismatched furniture, but it smelled like cedar and memories. My dad built it long before I was born, and it always felt like the safest place on earth. I drove up the morning the blizzard warnings started. The radio repeated them endlessly, but I shrugged them off. I wasn't planning to go anywhere. I wanted isolation. I wanted to listen to the wind instead of thinking about divorce papers, empty rings, and quiet dinners for one. That first night, as the storm rolled in like a living thing, I sat by the fire with a blanket around my shoulders, writing half-heartedly in a journal. The wind rattled the windows. Snow drifted sideways like white smoke, and in that silence, the kind that feels too deep to trust, I felt for the first time in months, completely alone. The power went out around 11. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft pop, then darkness swallowing the cabin inch by inch. I lit an old lantern from the mantel and set it beside me. The flame flickered with every gust, like it was shivering right along with the walls. Around midnight, I noticed something strange through the frost-coated window. Small beams of light moving between the pines. At first I thought maybe rescue workers were checking on houses, or maybe some late-season hikers got caught in the storm. But the way the lights moved, too slow, too careful, made my stomach tighten. Then I heard voices. No fresh tracks except the ones from earlier, a man said. His voice was sharp, not the calm, clipped tone of a rescuer. A second voice answered, "Storm's gonna cover everything anyway. Nobody's getting up here for days." I ducked down below the window, heart hammering. These weren't search teams. They were men who thought the mountain's isolation gave them free rein to do whatever they wanted. Boots crunched slowly through the snow. Someone laughed, a low, mean sound, and another said, "Cabin looks empty. Perfect." Panic scraped through me like ice. I grabbed my lantern, snuffed it out, and moved quietly through the hall, every floorboard threatening to betray me. I thought about running outside, but the storm was roaring so violently I knew I wouldn't make it far. The only real hiding place was the attic storage space. I climbed up, pulled the hatch shut, and crawled into the insulation. The cold fibers clung to my clothes and stung my skin, but it muffled my breath. Below me, the cabin door splintered. Someone muttered, "Check the kitchen. Grab whatever we can use." Another voice answered, "Keep your eyes open. I swear I heard something in here." And in the darkness above them, I prayed they wouldn't hear my heartbeat. They tore through the cabin like scavengers. Drawers slammed open, boots scraped against the floorboards. One man let out a satisfied grunt. "Food for 3, maybe 4 days. Storm did us a favor." Another voice, deeper, irritated, replied, "You sure nobody's here? Light was on earlier." "Storm probably tripped the lines," someone else said. "Relax." I lay curled between boxes of old winter clothes and a rusted snow shovel, every inch of me trembling. The insulation made my throat itch, but I forced myself not to cough. My dad used to tell me the cabin was built strong enough to survive any storm. I wondered if he ever imagined something worse than weather pushing its way inside. From the attic vent, I saw faint shapes moving below, shadows gliding across the floor. Then I heard the one sound I feared most. Footsteps headed toward the attic ladder. "Check up there," a man ordered, "just in case." My breath stilled. The ladder creaked as a hand grabbed it, but then another man yelled from the kitchen, "Hey, come look at this." The intruder hesitated, cursed under his breath, and stomped away. It bought me seconds, but seconds weren't enough. My brain raced. I needed a distraction big enough to spook them into leaving, something unpredictable, something they couldn't explain. Then I remembered the old metal vent shaft leading down behind the fireplace, the one my brother and I used to drop toys down when we were kids. I gently slid my lantern toward it, pushed it through the opening, and prayed gravity would carry the rest. A moment later, crash! The lantern shattered against the basement floor, echoing through the cabin like a scream. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted. "I told you this place ain't right," another whispered. "Something's down there." A third hissed, "Shut up. Everyone quiet." And in that heavy silence, I realized fear was finally working in my favor. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The storm beat against the cabin, and the men stood frozen in the dark below me, listening to something they couldn't understand. "I swear I heard whispering," one muttered. His voice shook, like right behind me. "You're hearing the wind," another snapped, but even he didn't sound convinced. A different man whispered, "You know what people say about cabins up here? Things happen during whiteouts." That was all it took. Boots shuffled backward, someone cursed. Something metallic clattered to the floor. "I'm not staying in here," the first man said, voice cracking. "I'm not dying in some haunted woods." The leader snarled, "We're not leaving because you're scared of—" A sudden groan sounded from the cabin's lower floor, the wind twisting through the broken vent system. But to frightened men in the dark, it must have sounded like something alive. "Nope, I'm out," one shouted. Then chaos erupted. Doors slamming, rushed footsteps, panicked breathing, men tripping over furniture as they bolted outside. The storm swallowed their shapes almost instantly. I waited, counted to 60, then 200, until nothing but the wind remained. Still, I didn't move. It wasn't until red and blue lights flickered through the trees, emergency crews shouting over the storm, that I finally pushed open the attic hatch. My legs wobbled. The house was cold, ransacked, and eerily quiet. A firefighter spotted me and called, "Ma'am, are you all right?" I nodded, though my voice refused to work. The moment I stepped outside, the snow felt less like a threat and more like a warning I'd survived. I spent the next few hours answering questions from sheriff's deputies, wrapped in a blanket and fighting back exhaustion. They told me the storm had closed all nearby roads for miles, that rescue teams were checking remote cabins in case anyone was trapped. They hadn't expected to find a break-in. One of the deputies shook his head as he looked at the smashed door. "Storms bring out the worst kinds of people," he said. "They think weather hides everything." As the adrenaline faded, I realized how close I'd come to being trapped with men who weren't just trespassing. They were settling in, planning to stay, planning to survive off what they found. "Do you have someone to stay with tonight?" a firefighter asked. "Yeah," I whispered, though I wasn't thinking of any person in particular. I was thinking about warmth, safety, places where the darkness didn't press so close. They drove me down the mountain once the plows carved a narrow path. The cabin looked small in the rearview mirror, its windows pitch black, its roof heavy with snow. It had always been my safe place, the one spot where life felt still and uncomplicated. But now, I understood something I hadn't before. Solitude isn't always peaceful. Silence isn't always gentle. And even the safest places can hold shadows when the world outside goes quiet. I didn't return to the cabin for the rest of December. I stayed with my parents, helped my mother bake cookies, listened to my dad complain about tangled Christmas lights. It felt warm, human, alive. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. Solitude can heal, but it can also blind you to danger. Preparation, awareness, and trusting your instincts can make the difference between vulnerability and survival. Even in peaceful places, stay alert, because safety isn't the absence of people, but the presence of caution. People always assumed I took house-sitting jobs because I loved quiet places, but the truth was simpler. I needed the money. Life after college hadn't unfolded the way I imagined. My degree in graphic design hadn't translated into a stable career. My student loans kept climbing, and I was juggling 3 part-time gigs just to keep my checking account above zero. So when my friend Hannah told me that the Barlows, the wealthiest couple on the west side of town, needed someone to watch their house every December while they traveled overseas, I didn't hesitate. Their place wasn't a house so much as an estate. A winding driveway led up a hill toward a stone front colonial, surrounded by carefully sculpted hedges and glowing Christmas displays. The first time I stepped inside, I felt like I'd accidentally walked onto the set of a holiday movie. Garlands draped along the banister, a 12-foot artificial tree sparkling with gold ribbon, and a fireplace big enough to roast an entire deer. The Barlows were kind, but distant in the way wealthy people sometimes are. They listed the rules with corporate precision: feed the golden retriever twice a day, water the poinsettias every 3 days, bring in packages from the porch, and never enter the locked wine cellar. "We'll be in Switzerland until the 29th, Mrs. Barlow said, handing me a folder of emergency contacts. "The security system alerts us if anything unusual happens, so you don't have to worry." I believed her. At the time. The first few nights were easy. I watched old sitcoms on their massive TV, worked on design commissions from the sunroom, and walked Max, their overly friendly dog, around the property. The only thing that bothered me were the faint noises inside the walls at night. Soft pacing, quiet thumps. I chalked it up to the old heating system and tried to sleep. I should have paid more attention. By the 4th night, the house had started to feel less charming and more cavernous. Every noise echoed. Every shadow felt longer than it should have been. Max, usually unbothered by anything, began pacing near the basement door, whining under his breath. I told myself dogs just sensed drafts or the hum of appliances, but deep down, something unsettled me too. It was the morning after a freezing rainstorm when I noticed the footprints. I had gone downstairs to grab pancake mix from the pantry. I flipped on the light, stepped inside, and froze. The floor was marked with muddy prints, small, narrow, shaped like work boots. They led from the basement door straight to the lower shelves where canned soups and pasta boxes sat. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I had stepped in something outside. But when I placed my own boot next to the print, the difference was obvious. Someone else had been in the house. Trying to keep myself calm, I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. No broken glass, no disturbed screens, no signs of forced entry at all. My stomach tightened. Whoever walked those prints hadn't come in. They had come from somewhere. I powered up the Barlow's security system and pulled up the camera footage. Their system was high-end, with time-stamped clips organized by motion detection. I started scrolling backward through the previous night. Nothing. Empty hallways, snow drifting across the driveway, Max sleeping under the dining table. Then something caught my eye, just a sliver of movement on the basement camera. A shape moved, barely visible, skirting along the corner just out of the camera's direct angle. Whoever it was knew exactly where the blind spots were. My mouth went dry. My hands shook as I clicked frame by frame. And that's when I realized the most chilling part. The person wasn't coming in at night. He was already inside. Somehow, some way, he had been living here before I ever arrived. I stared at the screen, the cursor hovering over the blurred frame of the intruder. My brain fought to deny it. I replayed the footage again, watching the faint outline of a man slip across the floor, hugging the shadows like he had practiced this 100 times. Max barked once, loud and sharp, as if confirming what I feared. I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon, a fire poker from beside the fireplace, and crept toward the basement. My breath fogged in the cold air as I descended the wooden steps. The basement smelled like concrete dust and old cardboard. The moment I reached the floor, Max growled, ears pinned back, and the storage room beneath the stairs had always struck me as oddly placed. Its door was slightly warped, and the Barlows had casually told me they used it for holiday decorations. But now, standing in front of it, I noticed something I never had before. A faint draft slipping through the cracks, warm air mixing with cold. I turned the knob slowly, fire poker tight in my grip. Inside, the space was barely larger than a walk-in closet. Holiday boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, but behind them, something else. I pushed aside a plastic bin labeled "Lights, Red," and felt my heart plummet. A makeshift bed, thin blankets folded over a flattened cardboard box, a half-eaten granola bar, a water bottle, a folded work shirt with a landscaping company logo on it. Someone had been living here. Recently. I backed up so fast I knocked over a box of old ornaments, sending them clattering across the floor. From somewhere above me, a board creaked, a slow, deliberate shift of weight. He knew I was down here. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I sprinted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, locked it, then dragged a dining chair in front of it. My hands shook so violently, I could barely hold the phone as I dialed 911. "Someone's in the house," I said, voice cracking. "He's been living here. I think he's downstairs." As I spoke, the basement door rattled once, then again, harder. He wasn't hiding anymore. The dispatcher instructed me to go somewhere safe and lock the door. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Max by the collar and ran upstairs, my legs trembling beneath me. The nearest room with a lock was the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. I slammed the door shut, turned the lock, and pushed a dresser in front of it. Max paced the room, barking at intervals, stopping only to press against my leg as if he could sense how close I was to breaking down. The house had changed. Every sound felt amplified. The settling timber, the tapping branches outside, the slow creaks traveling across the first floor. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, intentional. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching the fire poker in my shaking hands. "Police are on the way," the dispatcher reminded me through the phone. Her voice sounded far away. The footsteps reached the landing. Silence followed. An awful, stretched-out silence that felt like a held breath. Then the floorboard outside the guest room groaned under someone's weight. He knew exactly where I was. I pressed a hand over Max's muzzle as he growled, trying to keep him quiet. My eyes darted to the window, 2 stories up. Even if I climbed out, I'd break an ankle at best. The doorknob jiggled. I swallowed a cry. Then, in a low, angry voice muffled through the wood, I heard, "You weren't supposed to be here." Chills shot through me. He had planned to live unnoticed, just as he had in previous winters. I had interrupted his routine, and now he was furious. The doorknob stopped moving abruptly. More footsteps, fast this time, headed down the stairs. I heard the basement door open, then the sound of something being dragged across the floor. He was hiding again. 10 agonizing minutes later, flashing lights colored the snow outside the window. The police had finally arrived. The moment I heard officers shouting commands from downstairs, my legs nearly gave out. I shoved the dresser aside and opened the bedroom door with trembling fingers. Max bolted out first, tail low but eager to escape the confinement. I followed slowly, gripping the banister as I made my way downstairs. Blue and red lights pulsed through the windows, casting warped shadows across the walls. When I reached the bottom step, an officer raised a hand. "Stay back, ma'am. We have someone detained." 2 officers emerged from the basement with a man in handcuffs between them. He was thin, hair greasy and unkempt, wearing a dirty jacket with the logo from the same landscaping company I'd seen on the shirt in the hidden room. He kept his head down, but when he lifted it briefly, his eyes locked onto mine, cold, resentful, almost betrayed. "Former landscaper," one officer explained. "He worked here a couple of years back. Looks like he'd been sneaking in each winter and living off the stored food." Weeks, maybe longer. I stared at the man as they loaded him into the patrol car. A shiver ran through me when I realized he had been living just feet from where I slept. Listening, moving through the house while I watched TV or showered or made dinner. The thought made my stomach twist. Inside, another officer walked me through the basement. The hidden space looked even worse now that the adrenaline had faded. Piles of food wrappers shoved behind boxes, blankets matted with dirt, a cracked phone charger plugged into an outlet I never knew existed. "He knows the blind spots of the cameras," the officer said. "He's been doing this for a while." I nodded numbly. That night, after everyone left, I packed my things and left the Barlow estate behind. I couldn't stay, not one more second. For the rest of December, even in my tiny apartment, I felt phantom eyes on me every time I walked into a dark room. Being watched changes something in you. It never fully goes away. For most people, December means crowded malls, office parties, and too much peppermint-flavored everything. For me, it meant one simple ritual: the overnight train from Chicago to Detroit. I'd been making that trip since I was 20, back when my brother Evan first moved out there for work. No matter how busy life got, no matter how cold the wind blew off Lake Michigan, I always made that journey. Something about the hum of the train and the slow glide through snowy fields felt grounding, like the one piece of peace I saved for myself each year. This December, I needed that peace more than ever. Work had been chaos. My long-term relationship had ended in a slow, exhausting collapse, and I'd been losing sleep for weeks. The train seemed like the only place I could breathe. When I arrived at Union Station, though, something felt off immediately. The usual holiday crowd was missing. No families juggling luggage, no college kids heading home, not even the quiet business travelers with their laptops and headphones. Just a handful of passengers scattered around the platform, each looking as confused as I felt. The attendant checking tickets looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. When I handed him mine, he barely glanced at it before waving me through. Inside, the train felt even emptier. The fluorescent lights flickered, the air smelled faintly metallic, and the engine rumbled with an intensity I wasn't used to. I took my usual seat near the middle car, pulled my jacket tighter, and tried telling myself everything was fine. The storm had closed the highways, after all. Rail was the only option. Still, as the train lurched forward and the snow swallowed the world outside, I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. By the time we hit the outskirts of the city, the storm had thickened into a white curtain. The windows rattled each time the wind slammed against them. I tried reading, then tried sleeping, but my nerves wouldn't settle. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic, just wrong in the way a crooked picture frame bothers you, even if you can't explain why. Around midnight, the train should have slowed for Hammond, the first of the smaller overnight stops. Instead, it barreled through the station without even flickering the brakes. I sat up straighter, watching the platform lights streak past in a blur. Maybe they were behind schedule, I thought. Maybe the storm made everything unpredictable. But then we blew past the next stop, and the next. Finally, I walked toward the front car to find the attendant. He was standing stiffly near the door, wringing his hands. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We're skipping the local stations. Everything okay?" He swallowed hard. "The schedule changed tonight. Nothing to worry about." Except his eyes told a different story. Fear. Not the kind caused by bad weather, something deeper. Before I could press further, I heard voices from the front car. 2 men. Hard, clipped tones. I caught fragments of their conversation. "Stay off the radio. No security at the smaller stops. Keep going. Cargo stays cold. No delays." Cold dread washed over me. I stepped back quietly, letting the door shut behind me. My mind raced through possibilities. This wasn't a storm detour. This was something else, something dangerous. And whatever those men were transporting, they didn't want law enforcement near it. The empty train suddenly felt a lot less peaceful. My first instinct was to pretend I hadn't heard anything. Sit down, stay quiet, pray the train would somehow reach Detroit without incident. But instincts only protect you when they aren't screaming at you to do something. I forced myself to breathe. I remembered a documentary I had watched years ago about rail operations, specifically the emergency brake systems. I'd watched it because Evan once joked I should be prepared for anything. The memory suddenly felt less like trivia and more like a lifeline. But before I did anything drastic, I needed to find the other passengers. The train wasn't long, just 6 cars, and the storm outside muffled every sound. Moving quietly felt surreal, like sneaking through a familiar dream turned sour. I checked each aisle, whispering urgently to anyone I found. A college kid wearing headphones, an older woman clutching a knit hat, a middle-aged man asleep with his arms folded. I tapped his shoulder. He woke with a start. "What's going on?" he whispered. "I'll explain later," I murmured. "We need to move. Now." Within minutes, I'd gathered all 7 remaining passengers and led them toward the service compartment, an industrial storage area between cars that most travelers never noticed. It wasn't cozy, but the door was solid metal and could be latched from the inside. The older woman looked terrified. "Is this a robbery? Are they dangerous?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but this is the safest place for now." As the door clicked shut, a muffled voice echoed from the car we'd just left. "Check the cabins again." The hijackers were moving through the train. We needed to stay hidden, and soon we'd need a plan. Inside the service compartment, the air was cold and smelled like machine oil. The passengers sat close together on crates and equipment cases, whispering questions I didn't have answers to. The storm outside howled against the metal walls, making the whole train shudder like something alive. I crouched by the door, listening. The hijackers were moving quickly now, checking each car. Their boots hit the floor with heavy thuds, growing louder, then fading, then returning. Searching, confused. "They're gone," one man barked. "Where the hell did they go?" "Passengers don't just disappear," another snapped. "Maybe one of the stops." "We didn't stop." They were panicking. That was good. The attendant's voice joined theirs, shaky, apologetic. "I told you there were at least 8 people on board. I checked the manifest." "Then find them." I pressed my back to the wall, heart pounding. We couldn't stay hidden forever. They'd tear the train apart eventually. The emergency brake valve, my last resort, was in the junction between the cars, just a few feet from where we hid. Pulling it would override the controls in the front car. It would jolt the train to a halt, but it would also alert the hijackers instantly. Still, the longer we waited, the worse our chances. I looked at the others. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." They nodded, fear written across every face. I unlatched the service door, slipped out, and crouched near the coupling. Snow blew in through the seams, cold enough to numb my fingertips. My breath fogged the air. The valve glinted in the dim emergency light, a simple lever with enormous consequences. I gripped it and pulled with everything I had. The screech that followed was deafening. Metal screamed against metal as the wheels locked and the train bucked under my feet. I grabbed the rail to stay upright as the whole world jerked sideways. From the front car, shouting erupted. "He hit the brake! Find him!" But momentum was on my side. The train was slowing fast, grinding through snow until it shuddered to a complete halt. The silence afterward felt sharp and absolute. I sprinted back into the service compartment and slammed the latch shut just as footsteps pounded toward us. Fists hammered the other side of the door. "Open it! Do it now!" Nobody inside made a sound, not even the older woman, who covered her mouth with both hands. Minutes passed. Slow, heavy. I could hear the hijackers arguing, voices rising, fear overtaking anger. Then, finally, the sound I'd been praying for. Sirens in the distance. Through the narrow window at the end of the car, blue lights flashed against the snow. "Law enforcement!" someone shouted from outside. "Hands where we can see them!" The hijackers tried running, but officers boarded quickly. Commands echoed through the cars, followed by the thud of bodies hitting the floor. When the compartment door finally swung open, a state trooper stared at us with wide eyes. "You folks all right in here?" I nodded, suddenly exhausted. Thanks to the snow, and a little luck, we filed out into the freezing air, shaken but alive. The storm blew across the fields in sweeping white waves, and for the first time all night, I felt the tension drain from my chest. The train was finished. But we weren't. When something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Awareness and courage, even in small, uncertain moments, can protect you and everyone around you.
Working at North Star Books wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, quiet, and exactly the kind of job I needed after a rough couple of years. I'd moved back to Anchorage to help my mom after her surgery, and the bookstore offered a calm corner of the world where nothing felt rushed. Most days, I shelved new arrivals, made recommendations to tourists, and listened to the soft hum of the heater battling the Alaskan winter. December was always the strangest month. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, the cold bit straight through your coat, and customers either came in frantic for last-minute gifts or wandered in just to escape the wind for a few minutes. By the 18th, we were deep into a historic cold front below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Air so sharp it stung my lungs the moment I stepped outside. That night, I was closing alone, something I'd done hundreds of times. I turned the sign to closed, locked the door, and started counting the register. The shop felt extra quiet, the kind of silence that makes you more aware of your own breathing. Then the bell above the door chimed. I froze. The cash drawer was open under my hands. There was no mistake, I had locked the door. A tall man in a heavy coat stood by the entrance, snow crusted around his boots. His hood was pulled low, shadowing most of his face. He lifted his gloved hands a little and said, "Door must have been left open. I just need a book for my daughter." His voice sounded calm enough, but something in my gut tightened. Anchorage was small. December was dangerous for lone workers, and nothing about this man felt like a holiday shopper. I forced a polite smile. "We're closed for the night, but I can help you find something quick." He didn't answer, he just walked past me into the fiction aisle, his head low, shoulders stiff. I watched him from behind the counter as he wandered slowly, barely glancing at the books. His hands stayed shoved deep in his coat pockets, and every few seconds, he flicked his eyes toward the back exit. Something was off. I'd grown good at reading customers. Most took in the tables, picked up a few titles, maybe asked about the staff picks shelf. This man was casing the layout, not reading, not searching, calculating. "Sir," I tried again. "We really are closed." He turned his head slightly, though I still couldn't see his full face. "Won't take long." The tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either, just flat, like he was waiting for me to stop insisting. My pulse picked up. I stepped out from behind the counter just enough to keep the register in sight. If he wanted to grab something, he'd have to get past me, and he kept drifting closer to that counter, pretending to browse the greeting cards. "You got any cameras in here?" he asked suddenly. The question made every hair on my arm stand up. "Company policy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We have full surveillance." A lie. We had only 2 cameras, one by the door, one aimed at the register. Neither watched live. He paused. He'd heard the shift in my voice, the slight hitch I tried to cover. His hand slid slowly from his coat pocket. I didn't wait to see more. My heart pounded in my throat. I couldn't lock myself behind the counter, not if he had a weapon. I couldn't overpower him. I couldn't call the police without reaching for the landline behind him. I needed a different plan. "Let me grab you a gift bag," I said lightly. "We keep the holiday ones in the back." His eyes twitched toward me. Then he nodded. "Yeah, do that." His voice had changed lower, impatient. I walked calmly toward the storage room, forcing myself not to speed up, not to reveal the panic building under my skin. My fingers shook as I pushed the door open. Inside, the small room was freezing. The emergency exit sat at the far end, covered by a plastic curtain to block drafts. Management hated when we used it, because the alarm was hypersensitive, but alarms were exactly what I wanted right now. Behind me, I heard the faint scrape of his boots on the wooden floor. He was repositioning himself, watching. I grabbed a random bag from the shelf and whispered to myself, "Go." Then I slipped behind the curtain, shoved the crash bar, and the alarm exploded through the building, shrill, piercing, impossible to ignore. Cold air slapped me in the face as I stumbled into the alley. The snow was deep and powdery, slowing me down, but adrenaline kept my legs moving. I ran toward the diner next door, slipping once, catching myself on frozen pavement. Inside the warm diner, I burst through the door and gasped, "Call the police now." The employees didn't hesitate. Anchorage folks know trouble when they hear it. The police arrived faster than I expected, sirens echoing through the empty streets. 2 officers pushed into the bookstore while another stayed with me, asking for details as my hands trembled against the coffee mug someone handed me. "I just knew something was wrong," I said between shaky breaths. He didn't look at a single book. He kept watching the exits. The officer nodded. "You did the right thing leaving. These cold months bring out desperate people." Minutes later, radios crackled. "We've got him." My stomach dropped. "Did he have anything?" The officer hesitated only a second before answering. "Crowbar, in his jacket." A cold wave spread through me that had nothing to do with the 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside. He hadn't come for a book. He hadn't come for anything except an opportunity. And if I'd turned my back, or bent down to grab a bag without thinking, the story could have ended very differently. Another officer stepped into the diner, snow dusting his jacket. "He was hiding behind a display when we entered," he said. "Matches the description of the guy who hit 2 shops last week." The room felt suddenly smaller. The noise of the diner faded. All I could hear was the alarm still ringing faintly in my memory. "He followed a pattern," the officer continued gently. "Single employee, late closing, small shops. You weren't imagining anything." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying my breath. My instincts had spoken, and this time, I'd listened. The bookstore reopened 2 days later, though I took the rest of the week off. I tried going back to normal, sleeping in, baking too many cookies, wrapping gifts for my mom, but the December darkness outside my window felt heavier than usual. Every creak of the house made me sit up straighter. Every shadow reminded me of that man in the thick winter coat. Still, gratitude cut through the fear. Gratitude that I'd paid attention. Gratitude that I'd trusted myself. Gratitude that I hadn't stayed another minute in that shop with him. When I finally returned to work, my manager hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. She installed extra alarms, added a second closing shift staffer, and insisted on walking me to my car every night. Anchorage didn't suddenly feel safer, but it felt survivable. That night, as I switched off the lights and watched the snow swirl outside the front window, I realized something important. Instincts weren't paranoia. They were experience, awareness, and self-preservation, all rolled into one. The bell above the door jingled softly in the draft, and I glanced over not with fear, but with a sharper kind of caution. I locked the door carefully, checked it twice, and whispered to myself, "Never again." Not fear, not weakness, just preparedness, and relief that on that December night, I hadn't talked myself out of what my gut already knew. I never wanted the overnight shift at Street Brigades, especially not in December. I'd been a nurse there for 4 years, and every year the same thing happened. Staffing cuts, holiday schedule shuffling, and an endless wave of flu patients. By the time I walked in on December 12th, the snow outside was already waist-high, and the wind howled through the parking lot like it was trying to tear the building down. Ward C was technically still in use barely. It was the oldest wing, scheduled for renovation in the spring, with leaky vents and sensors that beeped for no reason. Most nurses avoided it, claiming it was haunted by bad wiring and worse memories. I'd laughed at that once, but the quiet of the place after midnight had a way of getting under your skin. My shift started normally enough, checking vitals, adjusting meds, chatting with the 3 patients still assigned to the ward. They were light sleepers, each rattled by the storm and the echoing emptiness of the halls. Around 2 a.m., I was sipping lukewarm coffee at the nurse's station when the call board chimed, room 317. The light blinked, an urgent red. Except 317 was empty. It had been empty for months. I straightened, frowning. Probably another glitch. Ward C was full of them. Still, a call light didn't activate on its own, not like that. I grabbed my keyring and started down the dim hallway, telling myself it was nothing, just old wiring, just the wind. But as I got closer, I wished I hadn't been scheduled at all. Room 317's door was cracked open, just barely. That bothered me more than the call light. I'd locked it earlier. All empty rooms stayed locked after visiting hours. I nudged the door wider with my foot, and my breath caught. Wet footprints, bare footprints tracked across the linoleum floor. The shape was unmistakable. Someone had walked in from the snow. My first thought was that maybe security had let someone in. My second thought was that no one should be wandering Ward C at this hour, especially barefoot. My third thought was just fear, cold, sharp fear that crawled up my spine. "Hello?" I whispered. "Is someone in here?" Silence. The room was empty. The air even felt colder, like the door had been open for a while. I stepped back out quickly and headed for the security office. The guard on duty looked exhausted, but he pulled up the hallway feed when I asked. The camera flickered with static interference again, but for a split second, a shape appeared on the screen. A figure, tall and thin, standing motionless at the end of the corridor. Then static. The guard sat forward. That's not supposed to happen. Before I could ask what he meant, the intercom crackled with a sudden crash from down the hall. Then the sound of drawers opening, slamming, opening again coming from another empty room. The guard cursed under his breath. "You're not the only one who's seen things tonight." My stomach twisted. Whatever was in the old wing wasn't a sensor glitch. It was a person, and they weren't supposed to be here. I hurried back to Ward C, heart hammering. A maintenance worker named Carl met me halfway down the hallway. He'd been repairing a heater unit and must have heard the noise too. His eyes darted nervously toward the abandoned rooms. "You heard it, didn't you?" he whispered. "Heard what?" He lowered his voice even more. "Someone's been getting inside at night, slipping past cameras, hiding in unused rooms. We think it's a former patient, discharged a month ago, then went missing." My mouth went dry. Why am I just hearing about this? Admin didn't want to scare anyone. Plus they thought he was long gone. Carl rubbed his palms together anxiously. But he knows this place, knows the blind spots, knows where the cameras don't reach. A loud clatter echoed from farther down Ward C. Carl flinched. "That's him," he said. "It has to be." I took a shaky breath and motioned for him to follow me. "Come on. We can't leave the patients alone." The ward felt different now, like the shadows had weight, like eyes were watching from behind every cracked door. When I passed Mrs. Dalton's room, she was awake, staring at the hallway. "Emma," she whispered. "Someone walked by my door a minute ago. Tall man. Didn't look right." I forced a steady tone. "Keep your door locked, okay? I'm handling it." But fear prickled under my skin. Who was this man? And how long had he been watching us? I reached the nurse's station again and froze. A shape stood at the far end of the corridor, tall, still, partially hidden by dim overhead lights. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of a hospital gown under a heavy coat. He swayed slightly, as if struggling to stay upright. Then he stepped forward, dragging one foot like it hurt to walk. The closer he came, the more details emerged. Unkempt hair, pale skin, and clutching a stack of old patient charts that should have been locked in storage. "Sir," I called carefully. "You're not allowed to be here. Let me get you help." He muttered something, voice rough and broken. "Need medication." They took it. "Can't sleep, can't think." I stepped back. He wasn't lucid. He wasn't safe. Behind me, one of the patients, little Mr. Ramirez, peeked out from his room, eyes wide. I motioned frantically for him to go inside and whispered, "Hide under the bed." He nodded and disappeared. My hands shook as I reached under the counter. The silent alarm button sat beneath the ledge, meant for emergencies we hoped we'd never face. I pressed it. The intruder's head snapped toward me. His eyes were hollow, frantic. He stumbled forward faster now, clutching the charts to his chest like precious artifacts. I ducked into the medication room and locked the door, listening to the heavy thud of footsteps outside. "Medication," he yelled. "Give it back." The only sound louder than my heartbeat was the faint wail of approaching sirens. Police stormed the wing within minutes. I heard commands, boots stomping, and frantic shouts echoing through the hallway. The man screamed, once panicked, confused, before officers restrained him gently but firmly. When they escorted him past the medication room, I opened the door just enough to see his face clearly. He looked lost. Not malicious, just desperately unwell, one officer explained quietly. He was discharged early last month, didn't have stable housing, must have slipped in through that broken basement window. Another added, he's been living in the old wing for days, eating leftover snacks, taking blankets, trying to treat himself. I felt an ache in my chest. Fear still lingered, but pity settled beside it. He hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. He was just drowning in his own mind, and the silent hospital at night had felt like shelter. By sunrise, the snow outside had turned the world white. My shift finally ended, but I lingered at the doorway of Ward C, staring down the long corridor where the footprints had been. The hospital suddenly felt fragile, too big, too quiet, too easy to hide in. As I clocked out, the morning nurse asked, "Rough night?" I managed a shaky laugh. The kind you don't forget. Walking to my car, I realized something important. Even places meant for healing can hold danger when the world outside grows cold and silent. And sometimes the people we fear are the ones who needed help the most. Awareness and compassion matter equally. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. But remember that every frightening moment may come from someone who is hurting, not just someone who means harm. I've always believed that a person's work ethic is defined by the last week of the year. Most people count the hours till vacation, while a few stubborn souls like me stay behind to finish what's left. That's how I ended up in an almost completely empty office building on December 21st, the last workday before the holiday break. I wasn't supposed to be there past 5. My team had already left by lunchtime, eager to beat the storm rolling in. By 7 p.m., downtown looked like a snow globe someone kept shaking. Thick flakes drifted sideways against the tall glass windows of our 14-story design firm. Inside, everything was still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the last person alive. I wasn't even stressed, not really. I'd been trying for months to prove to my boss that I could handle bigger clients, so finishing the project before break felt like my chance. After the final file exported, I packed my bag, shut down my computer, and went to lock my office. That's when I heard the elevator dinging. It wasn't loud, but in an empty building it sounded like a gunshot. I paused, thinking maybe one of the senior partners came back for something. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw a man in a dark coat walk out of the elevator. He moved quickly, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. I raised a hand to wave. He didn't wave back. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he disappeared into conference room A without hesitating, like he'd worked here his whole life. A strange uneasiness crept up my spine. Something about the way he walked, the urgency, the silence didn't feel right. I decided to check the rest of the floor before heading out. That decision is the only reason I'm still alive. I made my way down the hallway, calling out, "Hello? Anyone still here?" No answer. When I reached the creative bullpen, something hit me immediately. Several drawers were open. Not just open, but pulled completely out like someone was searching fast. One workstation had no laptop. Another desk was cleared of its camera equipment. A storage cabinet that should have been locked sat wide open, its shelves picked clean. That's when my chest tightened. That man wasn't security. He wasn't a coworker. He wasn't supposed to be here. My first instinct was to get out, run, sprint, leap into the freezing night and call the cops from the street. But when I glanced toward the elevator again, I noticed the button panel glowing, like it had been used more than once, which meant he might not be alone. That thought sent my pulse into overdrive. I ducked into the print room, quietly closing the door behind me. My hands shook as I locked it. The room smelled like warm toner and dust, and the hum of the big laser printer almost drowned out the faint voices filtering through the vents. Almost. Next floor, 7th and 8th. Easier to grab what we need. There were 2 of them, both men. One with a gravelly voice, the other younger, faster talking. Access card worked. Told you that temp wouldn't notice. My stomach dropped. They were using a stolen employee badge from a temp who'd quit that week. They knew the building. They knew the layout. They weren't guessing they had a plan. I backed up, gripping my phone. I couldn't call out loud. They'd hear me. But I remembered something from our annual training. The building had a silent emergency alert system for employees working after hours. My thumb hovered for a second. Then I hit the button. The screen flashed. Asterisk asterisk alert sent to on-site security. Asterisk asterisk. All I could do was wait, and pray they didn't try this floor next. Waiting in a dark print room, while 2 burglars wandered, my office floor was easily the longest 15 minutes of my life. I leaned my ear against the vent, barely breathing as I tried to track their footsteps. Sometimes they were close, so close I could almost picture them standing on the other side of the thin wall. Other times they drifted farther down the hallway. We should hit this floor. Looks like the good stuff's here, one said. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. Not yet, the other replied. We got time. Security's gone by 6. They were wrong, but I wasn't complaining. Footsteps shuffled. Something metallic clinked, maybe a crowbar, maybe a screwdriver. I pictured them prying open locked drawers, rummaging through personal belongings, stepping over the holiday decorations people left behind. The idea that these strangers had walked past my desk, my coffee mug, the family photo tacked to my wall, it made my skin crawl. Then the younger one said, "Check the break room." Sometimes people leave tablets plugged in. Their steps moved away, and for a moment, I let myself breathe. I pressed my phone to my chest like it was a lifeline. The screen was dark, but I could almost feel it waiting for flashing lights. Boots on tile, doors slamming open. The building creaked with winter cold. Snow tapped against the window. My mind kept drifting somewhere useless. If I died tonight, my unfinished project files were still on the server. My mom would hear about everything from a detective, not from me. My landlord wouldn't know why my rent check never came. And somewhere beneath all of that fear, a simple, stupid thought. I should have just gone home at 5. Suddenly, loud voices echoed closer than before. Thought I heard something. My breath stopped. They were coming back. I pressed myself against the far wall, wishing the print room had another exit. Wishing I had a weapon. Wishing 1,000 things that didn't matter. Their footsteps halted just outside the door. "You sure?" The younger one whispered. "Yeah," the other man said. "Something's off." A gloved hand jiggled the doorknob. I felt my knees go weak. The knob turned again, harder this time, and the entire door rattled in its frame. I slapped my hand over my mouth to stop any sound from escaping. The room felt too small, too hot. My heartbeat was so loud I worried they'd hear it through the door. "Locked," the older man muttered. "Employees don't lock doors." "Exactly." Silence. Then footsteps shifting. No walking away. I exhaled shakily, leaning my head back against the wall until stars danced in my vision. For several more minutes, the men's voices grew fainter. Lower floors, stairwells, elevator dings. I didn't risk looking out. Even breathing too loudly felt dangerous. Then, finally, a different sound cut through the building. Heavy footsteps, fast, coordinated, purposeful, followed by a flash of red and blue lights reflecting off the hallway tiles through the gap beneath the door. The police. They were here. Shouts erupted. Doors slammed open. Boots thundered downstairs. One of the men yelled something like, "Go! Go! Go!" Another cursed loudly. Metal clattered, laptops, maybe tools hitting the ground. I heard a scuffle, a grunt, someone being dragged across the floor. A moment later, all clear on 14. That's when I unlocked the door. An officer stood by the stairwell entrance, chest heaving, snow melting off his jacket in big wet patches. 2 men, one in a dark coat, one wearing a backpack stuffed with electronics, were handcuffed on the ground. "You the one who sent the silent alert?" the officer asked. I nodded, still shaking. "Well," he said, "you saved yourself tonight. I didn't go back inside the print room. I didn't pick up my bag. I didn't even think about the project I'd worked all day to finish. I just wanted out." The police walked me to the lobby, where snow piled up against the glass doors. The officers asked questions: how long I'd been there, what I'd seen, if I recognized the men. I told them everything. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. One officer explained that the intruders had tailgated behind a delivery driver earlier in the evening, then used a stolen access card to move freely through the building. They planned to hit 5 different floors and walk out with thousands of dollars in electronics before anyone noticed. "They didn't expect an employee to be working this late," he said. "Neither did I," I replied. By the time they escorted me to my car, the snow was falling so heavily that the streetlights looked blurred. I sat behind the wheel, letting the heater blast my freezing hands, trying to process the fact that in another timeline, I might not have walked out of that building alive. When I finally got home, I tossed my bag onto the couch and collapsed into it. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about how close danger had been just a thin office door away. The next morning, my boss called, apologizing, thanking me, promising better security measures. I appreciated it, but one thing was already certain. I would never work late alone again, especially not in December. Empty buildings make perfect hiding places for people who shouldn't be there. Growing up in northern Colorado means you learn 3 things early: how to drive in snow, how to read a storm before the forecast mentions it, and how to pretend you're fine even when your stomach says you're not. I moved to Colorado Springs after college, far enough to have my own life but close enough that my parents still guilt me into holiday visits. This year was no different. I left their house on December 27th, car stuffed with leftovers and laundry I swore I'd do myself. The sky looked heavy, the kind of gray that warns you daylight won't last long. I should have stayed another night, but I had an early shift the next morning and a stubborn streak that never knows when to quit. The highway was still manageable, slow traffic, thick snowflakes, visibility dropping by the minute. My GPS kept chirping at me like it knew better than I did. Then it rerouted me through Ridge Road. I'd heard of it. A mountain shortcut locals avoided in winter. Steep incline, sharp turns, patchy cell service. Still, I figured if the map suggested it, maybe plows had cleared it. Halfway up the climb, my engine sputtered. Once, twice, then died completely. The dashboard lights flickered out like someone blew out a candle. I coasted to a shaky stop against a snowbank. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I tried my phone, 1 bar flickering. I thought about walking, but the wind cut through my coat like it hated me personally. That's when headlights appeared behind me, cutting through the snowfall like twin blades. Someone was coming. The truck slowed as it pulled up beside my dead car. A middle-aged man leaned out the driver's window. His face was shadowed by the snow and the angle of the lights, but his voice carried clearly. "You can't stay here," he said. "Cars don't stay put on this road. You'll slide right off the mountain." His urgency felt off, too sharp, too eager. Still, I tried to sound normal. "I think it's just the engine. I'll call for help." He shook his head quickly. "You won't get service out here. Get in my truck. I'll take you down." I stepped closer but didn't open his door. Something about the way he watched me made my instincts pinch tight. "I'm grabbing my bags," I told him. "No," he snapped, then softened his voice. "Leave them. We don't have time. Why would my bags matter? Why rush me?" The tension in his face sharpened when I insisted again. "I'm not leaving my stuff." He exhaled sharply, annoyed, maybe angry, and put the truck in gear. "Suit yourself," he muttered, before driving off around the bend. I watched the taillights fade, relief mixing with unease. Something was wrong with that man. The road was bad, sure, but not panic-level bad, and his insistence on rushing me without my things felt rehearsed. Snow thickened, muffling everything. I tried my phone again. 1 bar, barely hanging on. I was about to attempt a call when I noticed something in the road behind me. Fresh tire tracks, circling back. He'd turned around just out of sight. I didn't have time to think. The moment I saw those looping tire tracks, my body moved on instinct. I grabbed my backpack and bolted toward the tree line. Snow swallowed my footsteps, branches scraped my jacket, and the cold stung my lungs. I crouched behind a cluster of pines just as the pickup truck rolled back into view. It stopped beside my car again, engine idling. Then I heard a door slam. Boots crunched through the snow. The man's voice carried low, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then the sound shifted, metal prying against metal. My car door handle shook violently. He was trying to get inside. I pressed myself lower into the snow, hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped my phone. 1 bar flickered again. I dialed 911 anyway, whispering, "Please, please, please." A dispatcher picked up. 911, "What's your emergency?" "I'm stranded on Ridge Road," I whispered. "A man is trying to break into my car. I'm hiding in the trees." The dispatcher's voice steadied me. She asked for any landmarks, details, anything to help crews find me. I gave her what I could. The man kept circling the car, checking windows, pulling at the trunk. At one point, he turned toward the woods like he sensed something. I held my breath so long my vision blurred. Officers and a snowplow crew are en route, the dispatcher assured. But 20 minutes in the dark on a mountain road feels like an hour underwater. Every second, I expected to hear footsteps coming directly toward me. The first sound of rescue wasn't sirens, it was the grinding roar of a snowplow chewing up the road somewhere down the mountain. The orange lights flickered through the snowfall like a lifeline approaching through a blizzard. The man heard it too. He stopped rattling my trunk. After a moment of stillness, he sprinted to his truck. The engine growled, tires spun against the ice, and the pickup peeled away, disappearing into the white curtain of snow. I stayed hidden until the snowplow's headlights washed across the trees. A worker stepped out, bundled in a reflective jacket. "Anyone up here?" he shouted. I rose from the pines, knees numb, voice cracking. "I'm here." He helped me back to the road, his face tightening when he saw my pride door and footprints circling the car. "You picked a bad night for Ridge Road," he muttered. "You're lucky we were already heading up." 2 patrol cars arrived shortly after. The officers inspected the tracks, took my statement, and exchanged looks I didn't like. "You weren't the first report," one officer said. "We've had a man pretending to help stranded drivers. He waits for heavy snow when people can't think straight." The second officer added, "He's never been caught, just disappears into the mountains." Hearing that made my skin crawl. They waited with me while the plow cleared the path and towed my car down the slope. Even surrounded by officers, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the pickup's headlights to reappear, but the road stayed empty. That night, I slept on my friend's couch in town instead of going home. Every time a car drove by outside, my eyes snapped open. Every metal scrape sounded like someone prying open a door. I kept replaying the moment the man leaned out of his window, insisting I leave my bags behind. It felt so obvious in hindsight, predators rush you so you stop thinking. The next day, I called my parents. I didn't want to worry them, but the word spilled out anyway. My mom cried. My dad went quiet, which is worse. He said, "Next time, you stay the night. Job can wait." I agreed. I didn't argue. Driving is different for me now. I watch the cars behind me longer than I used to. I never trust GPS shortcuts in winter, and if a stranger offers help on a lonely mountain road, well, I'll wait for the plow trucks instead. People like to say near misses make you stronger. Maybe that's true. Or maybe they just make you more aware of the thin line between normal and dangerous. Either way, I'm listening to my instincts now. December taught me that the world doesn't always try to hurt you, but when it does, it rarely gives a warning. Trust your instincts, even when being polite feels easier. Danger often hides behind helpful smiles, and your safety is worth more than someone else's expectations. I never planned on working the evening of December 23rd. Most people were home wrapping gifts, drinking cocoa, or arguing with relatives they only see once a year. Me? I was chasing overtime. Being a part-time delivery driver meant the holidays were the closest thing I had to a financial miracle. So when dispatch offered an extra route that stretched into the far suburbs, I didn't hesitate. The sun had already dipped when I loaded the last batch of packages into my truck. Fog rolled in fast, clinging low to the pavement, swallowing up familiar landmarks and turning every cul-de-sac into a dead end from a horror movie. Snow flurries drifted sideways, making my headlights look weaker than usual. I told myself it was fine. I'd driven worse. I'd seen weird things on night shifts before: unlit houses, dogs chasing the truck, drunk neighbors screaming at each other, but nothing ever stuck with me. My second-to-last stop was a quiet duplex with a lit wreath on the door. The last one, though, that was different. The address stood alone at the edge of town, beyond the streetlights, at the end of a long driveway that looked like no one had driven down it in months. As I turned onto that narrow path lined with tall, bare trees, something inside me tightened, the kind of instinct you don't question. Like when you step into a room and instantly know you're not alone. Still, I kept going. Money was money, and a job was a job. If I had known what was waiting in that house, or rather, who was waiting, I would have backed the truck up right then and there. But ignorance is a hell of a motivator. The house came into view slowly, piece by piece, like the fog didn't want me to see it all at once. 2 stories, peeling paint, sagging porch, the kind of place kids dare each other to touch on Halloween. A single porch light flickered, buzzing like a dying moth trapped in glass. I killed the engine and listened. Nothing but the wind slipping through the trees. I checked the package label twice. Same address, same name, nothing unusual. All right, I muttered, climbing out. Drop it and go. My boots crunched through the thin layer of snow. The air felt colder by the porch, as if the house itself exhaled frost. I knocked once, no answer. Knocked again, still nothing. I was sliding the package onto the doormat when I heard it movement inside. Slow, dragging footsteps crossing the floorboards. Not walking, dragging. I straightened up, heart hammering. "Delivery," I called out. "I'm leaving the package outside." For a moment, silence. Then the door creaked. It opened only halfway, revealing nothing but darkness. A voice whispered from the blackness, "Bring it inside." Every instinct screamed. I stepped back. I can't. Company rules. I have to leave it on the porch. The voice grew sharper, more demanding. "Bring it inside." I took another step back. "Sir, I'm not allowed in homes." The voice suddenly barked a name, someone I didn't know. Not angrily, almost panicked. Then again, louder. That was enough for me. I turned toward the driveway, and that's when I saw someone watching me from the upstairs window, barely visible behind a curtain. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Fog, darkness, nerves, easy ingredients for imagining things. But as I stared up at that second-floor window, the shape behind the curtain didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift, just watched. I froze halfway down the porch steps. My breath puffed white in the air. The curtain twitched like a hand had let go of it. The figure slid back, just a fraction, retreating into the room. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Nope, not dealing with this." I hurried toward my truck, forcing myself not to run. Running would have made everything feel too real. The house behind me groaned, wood settling or something shifting inside. I didn't want to know which. As soon as I reached my door, the upstairs light cut off instantly, as if whoever stood there realized I'd seen them. "Caleb to dispatch," I said into my radio, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm at the last address, and someone inside is acting strange." Door was opened halfway. They were shouting. "Might be a welfare check situation." Dispatch hesitated. "That address should be vacant. Are you sure you're at the right place?" I read her the numbers again. She went quiet. "We're marking the stop and contacting local police. Leave the property immediately." That was the easiest instruction I'd ever followed. I threw the truck into reverse and didn't breathe until I saw the main road again. But even as I drove off, a feeling clung to me like someone was still watching from behind those dark windows, counting the seconds until I vanished into the fog. I drove straight to the station, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. Maybe someone was squatting there. Maybe the owner had returned home unexpectedly. Maybe the voice was confused, not threatening, but the way it demanded, the way it changed so quickly. The eyes in the window. No. Something was off. Inside the station, an older officer named Ramirez listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Dunning. Ramirez folded his arms. "That house has been vacant for months." I blinked. Vacant? But someone was definitely inside. "The owner's been in long-term care since August," he continued. "House has no heat, no utilities, and the electricity was shut off weeks ago." My skin crawled. "Then how was the porch light on?" Dunning shook his head. "It shouldn't have been." A chill ran through me. The officers pulled up recent reports: trespassing, break-ins, squatters using remote homes for shelter. Some even tried to lure delivery drivers or salespeople inside, hoping they'd drop their guard. Ramirez said, "You did the right thing leaving. People get desperate. Some get unpredictable." I didn't want to picture the voice I heard paired with the face behind the curtain. Was it one person? Were there more than one inside? Before I left, the officers told me they'd check the property. I asked if they'd call me with updates. Ramirez's answer was vague, too vague. "We'll let you know if we find anything concerning." I didn't like the way he said times if asterisk, because I already knew. There was something concerning in that house. Dispatch kept me off routes near the outskirts for the rest of December. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Every time I passed a dark house with a porch light flickering, my chest tightened. Every time I walked up to a door and heard movement inside, I stepped back automatically. A few days later, Ramirez called. They'd checked the house. Someone had been living there, he said. Whoever it was used candles, blankets, old cans stacked in corners. signs of someone moving between rooms. But no one was there when you checked? No, he said quietly. They left in a hurry, meaning they left after I drove off, meaning they were hiding while officers searched, meaning they were still out there. The thought stuck with me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I stopped taking late routes, stopped volunteering for extra pay, stopped trusting houses that looked empty. You'd think delivery work is simple: drop the box, take a picture, move on. But people forget that we walk up to strangers' doors every day, not knowing who or what is on the other side, and sometimes the house is supposed to be empty. That's what makes it worse. To this day, I still see that upstairs window in my dreams, the curtain pulled just wide enough for someone to watch me walk back into the fog. People always assume working at a seasonal skating rink is charming, like I spend my evenings handing out cocoa and watching kids do wobbly laps while holiday music plays in the background. And sure, sometimes it is, but most nights, especially late in December, it's just cold, lonely work. I took the job my freshman year of community college because I needed flexible hours and a reason to get out of my apartment. By my second winter, I'd gotten used to the routine. I handled the closing shifts, sweeping stray ice shavings, disinfecting rental skates, shutting down the speakers that looped the same 12 holiday songs. The rink sat in a plaza downtown, bordered by shops that closed much earlier than we did. By the time I locked the gates each night, I was usually the only person left within half a block. On December 29th, the temperature dropped into the single digits. The wind sliced through my coat every time I stepped outside the warming hut. Most guests left long before closing. The ice was empty by 9:45 p.m., just me, the echo of distant traffic, and the low hum of the floodlights. I was packing up rental skates when I heard blades scraping across the ice. At first, I thought my imagination was messing with me. The rink gets loud when you're alone with it long enough. But when I stepped outside, I saw him, a lone skater, dressed head to toe in black, gliding in long, slow strokes across the far end of the rink. Hood pulled down low. No visible face. He shouldn't have been there, but he was, and he wasn't leaving. I shouted across the ice, "Hey, rink's closed." No reaction, no wave, no acknowledgement, just the same long, deliberate glide along the boards. The cold made everything sharper. Each scrape of his blades echoed under the lights. I stepped onto the ice, holding a broom like it might matter. "Sir, we're closed. You need to head out." He stopped abruptly, like someone hit a switch. He stood in the dim corner where the floodlights didn't reach, the hood of his coat hiding any detail of his face. Even from across the rink, I felt it. He was watching me. I tried again. "Sir," I said, "we're closed." He didn't answer. Instead, he began skating backward, slow and smooth, never breaking eye contact. The way he moved, it wasn't the shaky, casual skating you usually see after hours. It looked practiced, maybe even graceful. But the silence ruined any beauty in it. My heartbeat grew loud in my ears. Something felt wrong. Rink regulars sometimes lingered too long, but they always joked, apologized, or at least acted human. This man felt like a shadow pretending to move like a person. I stopped halfway across the rink. If I went any closer, I knew I'd regret it. So I turned around to head back toward the exit and call security. But the moment my skates hit the center line, I heard him. Blade edges cutting ice, fast, straight toward me. A surge of panic shot through me. I bolted for the gate. I practically threw myself off the ice, kicking off my skates the second my blades hit rubber. My fingers fumbled with the gate as the scraping behind me grew louder, faster, desperate. Just as I slammed the gate shut and snapped the latch into place, something slammed into the metal from the other side. Hard, the entire fence rattled violently, the hinges groaning like they were about to tear loose. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, staring through the chain links. But he didn't speak. He didn't yell. He didn't curse me out. He just stood there, a tall figure in black, chest rising and falling. Hard to tell if he was out of breath or simply waiting for me to get closer again. His hood was still pulled low, face swallowed in shadow. We stayed frozen like that, him inches from the gate, me clutching my phone. I whispered, "Security's coming." It wasn't true. I hadn't even dialed yet, but something in me needed to say it. He tilted his head slowly, like he was listening for something behind us. Then, without a word, he stepped backward, gliding into the center of the rink. He didn't skate toward the exit gate. He didn't leave the way he came. He just drifted into the darkest part of the ice until I couldn't tell where the shadow ended and he began. When I finally dialed security, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I kept my eyes on the rink the whole time, but when the guards arrived, the ice was empty. Security took me seriously, which surprised me. Usually they assume night shift workers exaggerate things from nerves or boredom, but when they saw how shaken I was and the dent in the gate, they escorted me back inside the office to review the cameras. The rink had 4 overhead security cams set on a constant loop. We queued up the past hour. I watched myself walk out, watched myself step onto the ice, watched myself react to something. But the strange thing? I was reacting to nothing. On camera, the far corner of the rink was empty. No skater, no shadow, no tall figure gliding backward. It showed the gate rattling hard, violently enough to send my broom clattering across the ground, but the footage captured nothing making contact with it. Just the metal shaking on its own. I stared at the screen, cold settling deep in my stomach. It's probably a glitch, one guard said. The cold messes with the cameras sometimes, but glitches don't dent metal gates. Glitches don't leave skate tracks carved into fresh ice. Glitches don't breathe the same air you do. The other guard radioed for a full sweep of the plaza, but no one found anything. No footprints in the snow beyond the rink, no sign of forced entry. The only thing they found was a single pair of rental skates sitting alone in the middle of the ice skates we hadn't loaned out that night. I didn't finish my closing duties. Security walked me to my car, and I drove home with frozen hands and a racing mind. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the outline of that hooded figure gliding toward me, silent as falling snow. The next morning, I emailed my manager and asked to switch to daytime shifts. I didn't care if it meant fewer hours. I wasn't staying alone in that rink again. He didn't argue. He just wrote back, *understood. This isn't the first time we've had concerns, *. That word sat in my gut like ice. Over the next few days, I heard bits and pieces from older staff. Rumors about someone breaking into the rink at night long before I worked there. Stories of workers hearing blades scraping after hours, shadow-like figures seen on the ice despite the gates being locked. No one wanted to believe any of it. But no one wanted to work alone at closing time either. On New Year's Eve, I walked past the rink on my way home. Music played, families laughed, lights sparkled over fresh ice. Everything looked normal, safe, almost magical, but in the far corner where the floodlights didn't reach, I caught a flicker of movement, a dark silhouette gliding silently across the rink before disappearing behind a group of skaters. I blinked, and he was gone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my mind was still replaying that night, but I'll tell you this, I never looked directly into the dark corners of that rink again. Some things feel too real to question, and some silhouettes shouldn't exist at all. Always trust the fear that warns you before danger shows its face. Instinct is often the first and only signal that something is deeply wrong.
Before our school ever announced the overnight lock-in, I wouldn't have called myself an easily scared person. I grew up in a small town where the worst thing that happened on a school day was someone forgetting their homework or spilling lunch in the cafeteria. Life felt predictable, safe, and maybe that predictability made me blind to the fact that even familiar places can hide things you never truly notice until it's too late. Our school was old. Not historic old, just worn out. The kind of place where you could tell every renovation was unfinished. Hallways that dead-ended for no reason, doors painted shut, staircases that led to storage rooms nobody used. But the worst of all was the hallway behind the auditorium. It wasn't even a full hallway, more like a narrow path of lockers that stretched behind the stage wall, dim and neglected. Everyone knew it existed. Almost no one went there. Growing up, kids whispered stories about it. Someone died back there. A teacher got locked in once and never came back out. Dumb middle school tales meant to give you goosebumps during lunch, but whenever we had assemblies in the auditorium, I would glance at the door leading to that hallway and feel something strange, like the place wasn't empty, even when it should have been. When the school announced the lock-in, everyone lit up with excitement. It was all the 8th graders talked about for weeks. A whole night in the gym with no homework, no parents, just friends, pizza, and movies. The perfect combination of chaos and freedom. My best friends Tamsin, Milo, and Reese and I grabbed the corner near the gym doors so we'd have room for our sleeping bags. We joked that if anything creepy happened, at least we were closest to the exit. Turns out, we should have been more worried about what was already inside the school, long before we ever arrived. The lock-in started off just like everyone hoped, loud, messy, and full of energy. Teachers tried to enforce rules, but it was like trying to take attendance in a tornado. Kids were playing tag in the dark, others dumping entire bags of chips onto blankets, and some were trading candy like it was a stock market. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered, just once. Quick. But it was enough for Tamsin to look over her shoulder. "Did you see that?" she asked. "Yeah, the power blinked," Milo said, shrugging. "No," she whispered, lowering her voice. "There was someone in the hallway behind the auditorium door. Tall. Like, leaning." Reese laughed first. "You're just trying to freak us out." "I'm not kidding," Tamsin insisted. I could see the color drain from her face. He was right there. I wanted to believe she imagined it. The hallway was always dim and weird, even in daylight. At night, it was practically begging for someone to mistake a shadow for something else. Still, none of us volunteered to go check. 2 hours later, things started going missing. First, Tamsin's phone disappeared straight out of her sleeping bag. She accused Milo of messing with her until Reese found it under a bench across the gym, screen smudged like someone had been gripping it with sweaty hands. A teacher's keyring vanished next. Then a girl from homeroom came back from the restroom, pale as chalk. "Someone was walking behind me," she whispered, "but nobody was there." We all exchanged uneasy glances. Still, the adults kept saying the same thing. "It's just kids pulling pranks. It's dark. Shadows play tricks on you." Maybe they were right. But when the lights flickered again, I swear I saw a shape move near that forgotten hallway. And this time, it wasn't just Tamsin who noticed. At around 1 in the morning, the gym finally quieted down. A handful of us stayed awake, but most kids were knocked out in their sleeping bags. I was thirsty and my water bottle was empty, so I dragged myself across the gym floor toward the fountain. The water fountain sat right beside the door to the forgotten hallway. I told myself I wasn't scared, that nothing bad was going to happen. But the second I stepped into the hallway's doorway, the motion sensor light snapped on with a loud click. The strip of hallway came alive in a pale, flickering glow. That's when I heard it. A scratch. Soft, deliberate. Not like metal shifting, not like pipes settling, but like fingernails dragging across the inside of a locker. I froze. Another scratch, then a third, longer, slower, followed by a quiet, breathy laugh. I stepped back so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My throat tightened, but I managed to whisper, "Nope, nope, nope." I sprinted back to the gym and grabbed Tamsin, Milo, Reese, and the 2 nearest teachers. The adults rolled their eyes at first. "Seriously? Scratching? It's probably a mouse," one said. "Mice don't laugh," I shot back, trembling. That got their attention. We walked as a group back toward the hallway. The second the teachers opened the door, every one of us heard it. A muffled thump from behind the metal row. "Which locker?" the teacher asked. I pointed with a shaking hand. 214. He approached it slowly, gripping the door handle like he expected it to bite. With one pull, the locker swung open, and everything inside made the world tilt. A sleeping bag, snack wrappers, a half-drained water bottle, a flashlight, a Polaroid camera, and then the photos scattered across the floor. Dozens of them, all taken inside the school, all taken during the lock-in, including one of Tamsin, snapped at the exact moment she thought she saw someone, from a low angle, from behind the slats of locker 214. The teachers went pale. One immediately rushed to lock the hallway door while the other barked for everyone to return to the gym. Kids woke up confused, rubbing their eyes, asking questions the adults refused to answer. Meanwhile, I knelt beside the pile of Polaroids. Some were harmless looking. Kids sleeping, groups talking, teachers standing near the snack table. But the more I examined them, the more my stomach twisted. The angles were wrong. Too low. Too hidden. Many were taken from cracks in doors, behind corners, through vents. Someone had been watching us all night. "Hey," Milo whispered beside me, voice shaking. These were taken before the lock-in even started." He was right. Several pictures were of empty classrooms, dark stairwells, the quiet gym before any of us arrived. Whoever this person was, they had been living in the school longer than any of us imagined. Suddenly, from the back of the hallway, we heard a sound. A metal door slamming. A fire exit. The teacher closest to it ran toward the noise, flinging the door open to cold night air. The emergency alarm screamed through the school, but outside, only footprints leading away into the darkness. "Stay together," one teacher ordered us. "No one moves until the police get here." Kids were crying. Some were whispering that it was a ghost, others insisting it was a burglar. I knew better. I kept seeing the inside of locker 214 in my mind. The sleeping bag, the flashlight, the wrappers. This wasn't supernatural. It was someone real. Someone who knew the school well enough to hide right under our noses. The police arrived, searched the grounds, checked every exit, and eventually confirmed what we already knew. He was gone. The lock-in ended early. Parents were called. Hallway 214 was sealed shut the next morning. But I couldn't stop thinking, how long had he been there? And how many nights had we been in the building while he watched? Life at school moved on. At least that's what everyone pretended. Teachers avoided the topic like it was radioactive. The principal claimed the intruder was likely a transient individual seeking warmth, and there was no ongoing threat. But no one believed it, not really. They changed the locks on the back exit. They installed cameras in the auditorium. They repainted the forgotten hallway. But they never removed locker 214. Sometimes, during passing periods, I'd walk past the auditorium entrance and feel that same cold draft, that same creeping sensation that someone was still watching from a place just out of sight. One afternoon, months later, I lingered by the auditorium because I had to pick up a permission slip. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. I shouldn't have gone near it, I knew that. But something drew me closer. The light flickered, just like it had the night of the lock-in. Then I heard it, a soft rattle from locker 214. Not loud, not violent, just testing. A gentle tap from inside, like someone brushing their fingertips against metal, waiting to see if the door would open. My whole body went cold. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the locker. When I reached the corner, I ran. Full speed, all the way to the front of the school. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends, not a teacher. Because deep down, I knew something they all preferred not to believe. Just because they never caught him doesn't mean he left. And sometimes when the hallway is quiet and the lights buzz overhead, I swear you can still hear the faintest rattle from locker 214. Like someone inside is waiting for another night when kids fall asleep in the gym and no one notices the sound of a door gently opening. Danger doesn't always come from the places we fear. It often hides in the places we assume are safe. Trust your instincts, pay attention to the unease you feel, and never ignore warning signs simply because the environment seems familiar. Awareness and caution can protect you long before help arrives.